Welcome to American Issues Take One on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today we'll talk about what citizens can do to control the Trump regime. What are the prospects for success of those efforts? Our co-host for the show is Ben Davis. Our guest for the show is David Larson, professor at the Mitchell Hamlin School of Law. Welcome to the show, both of you. You know, people are increasingly depressed and feeling powerless against the disruption and damage resulting from Trump's action. It's important that we discuss what steps citizens can take to respond to these actions and hopefully to have some effect on them going forward. Let me start with you, Ben. What is the state of mind that you see in the community? Are people ready to join a resistance? Are they ready to take actions, or would they rather be, wallflowers?
My sense of it is that there are a lot of people who really may not even be aware of what's going on, and are what we would call passive, which is not surprising, really, because first of all, it's going very quickly, and second of all, what's going on with the administration is they're acting very quickly, and they're kind of flooding the zone, and keeping up with all the different parts of it is difficult. And people have lives. People have lives to live. And so, as long as their own thing is not hit directly, they pretty much let it go. Now, obviously, if you're a federal worker, you are wide awake right now. You've been wide awake. You just lost your job in particular. And I think that if you are somebody near getting Social Security, you are wide awake right now, or somebody getting Social Security. I know I've gotten messages saying, download your earnings from Social Security because it's not clear the website's going to still be around, and things like that. If you are a foreigner here, I'm not talking undocumented, but just a foreigner all the way up to a green card, you're being told basically that if you say anything political that the Trump administration doesn't like, you're going to be, your visa is going to be revoked, and they're going to try to deport you. I was at a demonstration today for Mahmoud Khalil at University of Virginia, for example, where a bunch of people were there, protesting what's happening to him and some others. Last night there was a Turkish woman named Ramoza Öztürk who was picked up by ICE at Tufts University, right? So depending on where you're sitting, obviously, if you were a DEI person anywhere, if you're one of the people at one of the law firms that have been challenged, if you're one of the people working at companies that have contracts with the federal government, all of these people are aware of the piece of the pie that's related to them. And then the question is, what are they going to do about it? And there are two rationalizations a lot of people have, which is one, I have to feed my family, therefore don't get involved. Or the other one, which was kind of what the guy Paul Weiss did when he bent the knee, which was, I have to save the company. Those two have gone a long way towards making people passive to malevolent power. And some of the studies that I've read recently have said that basically 2/3 of people will comply with malevolent authority. Ordinary people will. Now, let's talk about the 1/3 for a second. The people who are having the contradiction, are feeling the contradiction very strongly. I think that there's a significant number of people who are feeling, and the term just was given to me by a book I read from an old resistance guy, 93 years old, indignation. That's really the emotion of indignation that this is not possible. And so then the question is, what can you do as an ordinary person? And so people are doing everything they can do. They're educating themselves. They're trying to find ways to agitate. There's so many, writing letters, being on media, contacting their Congress people, holding town halls, whether the congressperson is there or not, demonstrating in front of Tesla to make Tesla's stock price go down to as low as possible, writing reports for the UN Human Rights review for the United States, which is actually coming up in November. And then I know that there have been lawyers and people at the state level and entities that have been preparing for all of this for quite some time. So we have up to 125 lawsuits on various parts of all this. Everyone may not have seen this, but Signalgate, the whole Signal thing that happened yesterday, there's a lawsuit been filed today about that, which is as a violation of the Federal Records Act. And guess who it's in front of? Judge Boasberg. Judge Boasberg, who is the judge on this whole thing about disappearing people to El Salvador, right? So, I mean, there are people who have been primed, ready at both state and entity level who are pushing back, and will they be successful? You can never know. But what's important, and from everything that I've read, whether it's Timothy Snyder here who's at Yale, who, by the way, I just heard he is spending 3/4 of his time, guess where? University of Toronto. He's already got, a little foot outside thing. Everything I read says that it's at this moment. This is the crucial moment where you do what you can to fight back against this kind of effort to be authoritarian and fascist. So not as many as maybe you'd like, but there still are a number of people.
Well, Ben and David, I did include a list of the possibilities that came to mind, and I'll run through the list real quick. You mentioned some of them, Ben. Writing letters, op-ed pieces, signing petitions, placing ads in the media and social media, video and audio reports and podcasts, email and text messages to your mailing lists and your text message list, door-to-door discussions, that's hard, media appearances, public protests, town hall meetings, filing and participating in lawsuits, running for office, supporting the Democratic Party, supporting candidates in your state and elsewhere. How about Florida and New York to swing the House, who are running for office, organizing and joining cause organizations, resistance organizations, sending money to worthy candidates and organizations, and dealing with the flood of issues that come down the pike. There's a lot of them because the mission, Trump's mission, is to flood the zone. So David, how likely is the resistance group, let's call it that, likely to succeed and actually have an effect on this administration? And can you also talk about the risks involved? I'd like to know your choices of action, but also the risks.
To pick up on one thing both you and Ben were saying, is that I do think the momentum is building. I think it takes a little time for the pain to come home, for the consequences of these policies to actually start touching people. You can put in the tariffs, but until you harvest your crops and you have silos full of soybeans and corn, and so you can't export anything, that's when the pain comes home. When there's cuts to Medicaid and your older relatives who are living in assisted care, who followed the rules and spent down all their assets to $2,500 so that they could have Medicaid pay for their elder care, who now have that Medicaid support cut off and they have no assets left because they spent them down to $2,500. And suddenly now when your parents and your relatives are going to get kicked out of their nursing homes and nursing homes are going to close, the pain's going to come home. And I think there's a bit of a lag time on these policies for the pain to come home. I think as it comes home, people are going to be receptive to an alternative. And I do think we have to be careful because I think the human reaction is to say to them, man, it's your choice. It's your fault. You pick this. And I think we really got to resist that and be a little more empathetic. And in fact, say that, boy, man, I'm sorry this is happening to you. But there is a solution. There's another path that can help you. And I want to help you and I want to give you some good advice. Instead of inflaming people and accusing them, I think it's really important to kind of, regardless of how we got here, at this point, to be empathetic, to say that I understand what you're feeling now, and I'd like to show you some alternatives, and there are alternatives there. in particular, one alternative that I've turned to, and I talked a little bit with Jay about this on the phone, is that April 1st, there's going to be two special elections in Florida. Um, and Gabe Valamont and Josh Wheel are running for those two seats, Democrats. The tally in the House right now, U.S. House of Representatives, is 218 Republicans and 215 Democrats. Okay, so here's two open seats right now. If those seats can go Democratic, suddenly that House goes to 218, 217. This summer, Blake Gendevine is running against Elise Stefanik, or running for Elise Stefanik's open seat. She was appointed to the UN. So there's an open seat in New York, and he's running for that. He wins that seat. We're 218, 218. We're tied in the House now. It's true that you've got the vice president, who is the tie-breaking vote, but that assumes that you're going to hold those 218 together to get to that tie. And that's a really dicey question. Now, can you hold 218 Republicans together when they're kind of themselves a little bit all over the board? So I think these elections are unbelievably important. And what I'm encouraging people to do is to donate to those elections. I wish I had Elon Musk kind of money. I don't. I have much smaller amounts, but I've donated to Gendevine in New York, to Valamont and Wheel in Florida. I sent money to John Ossoff, who's probably running against Marjorie Taylor Greene for the Senate. My money's not going to tip the election, but to the degree that we can get more and more people, hundreds, thousands of people lining up, supporting these people visibly, financially, even if it's a small grassroots. And on some of their websites, the checkbox is $5. They start with $5. Can you donate $5? If we can build that kind of support, thousands, tens of thousands supporting these candidates, I really believe there's a good chance of flipping these three seats, and suddenly we're tied in the House of Representatives. I mean, if we want change, that's where we have to make it. We have to make it in Congress, and there's actually an opportunity to do that right now. So I'm hoping people are paying attention to these elections and get behind these candidates.
David, you suggest that people have to focus. I listed a couple dozen possibilities. If you took them all, you'd be spread too thin. And I think just as a human nature thing, you would probably lose your focus and not be all that effective. So you've got to pick something or some very few of them or whatever you like and focus on that. And I think it's very important to pick the ones that will have some effect. And these elections coming up, they will have some effect that could change things within the next few months. So I think it's very important for people to do that. Do you agree that you have to focus, or should you be doing everything?
You do what you can. That's it. So I think there are people who are able to do a broad range of things. Let's put it this way: their bandwidth is broad, right? I mean, if you take someone on the other side, like Elon Musk, his bandwidth is extraordinarily broad, and he's able to implement things in various different places. Well, on this side, I'm sure that there are people who are like that too. On the other hand, not knowing, sometimes people's bandwidth is very, very narrow. They got the only thing they can really do is donate some money, really, in their life. They got, grandparents to deal with, the kids, all this stuff. And that's as far as they can go. They can't go out to demonstration and all that. And so, and I think one of the things that's important is to do one thing, okay? Just do one thing. Whatever it is, because the first time you do something to express that kind of indignation, what happens, I think, is you see other people also who are just like that. And doing the first thing helps to develop to do the second thing and to help you find your focus. You don't have to be, Martin Luther King, or you don't have to be, Gloria Steinem or somebody like that. In fact, last night I met Angela Davis, right? You don't have to be Angela Davis, I mean, you just have to be yourself and just do one thing. It could be in your church, it could be in your synagogue. Of just expressing your dissent from what is going on. And then where's the next step? The thing that I don't, and I'm going to join in with Dave agreeing with this, is I have a certain suspicion, or let me put it, I have a certain kind of hesitancy when I see people on their high horses complaining about somebody else having bent the knee. It certainly bothered me when I saw certain things happen, right? But when I see sort of people of power or in the media complaining about this, that, or the other person having bent the knee, as time has gone on in these 2 months, I've started to say to myself, yeah, fair enough, but are you just doing that so we're distracted and focused on them and not on you and what you are doing? Because it's, like when all that Paul Weiss stuff and all these people were really upset about Paul Weiss and all these law firms and people were really upset about it. But then the question to me is, okay, so what are you doing in your own law firm, right? And it's nice to have sort of a scapegoat, saying there, but the more important thing is to say, okay, well, what are you doing? And even inside a place like Paul Weiss, it's what are the people there doing to make sure that what happens is consistent with what the Constitution would like, So for me, it's just do one thing, whatever it is, just do one thing, and then see where it goes from there, and then do a second thing, and then you find your focus or you find your bandwidth.
Yeah, because it's all dynamics. It's all changing. The issues are changing. The country is in a transformation of sorts. But let me offer this thought, Ben. There's really two kinds of things you can do. One is you can sit at your desk and write a letter or a check all by yourself. And you don't have to be in a group for that. But if you go to see AOC and Bernie Sanders, and there's 40,000 people out there in the street, that's different because you have the comfort, the encouragement of the other 39,999, and they're all on the same page, and you are drawn into a collaboration, which has clear effect in the media. So how do you make a choice like that? Because some things are just solo things. They don't require anybody else, just you and being informed. Other things require a certain amount of leadership and followership to be among the 40,000. And that's not the only example of crowds that are gathering across the country. Rachel Maddow shows, footage from all these crowds in all these cities. And I think there's a process there we should discuss. Don't you agree that it's easier to be in a crowd?
I think we are at a tipping point. Trump keeps talking about this giant mandate he had. He didn't have a giant mandate. He had less than 50% of the votes. I think that we're close on a lot of issues now. Rallies and high energy and shouting energize people and they get them moving, and that's a good thing. But I move in a lot of different circles, and I know a lot of conservative people and conservative politicians. And when they get an angry letter, even though there might be good substantive arguments in it, throw it away. It's just they see the tone, they don't read the letter. It just doesn't have any impact at all. But that being said, their constituents are getting hurt now. And we've got a lot of rural counties here in Minnesota, and a lot of those counties are going to suffer now. So if you write those letters, and I think in a more measured tone, saying that the people that voted you into office, the people that you're supposed to be caring for, are suffering in these specific ways. Can't you help these people? Instead of challenging them, accusing them, you just got to tip a few. That House of Representatives is so close that if you can reach a few people, and I got to believe in 218, that maybe if they get a letter with a measured tone, that kind of spells out the pain that people are feeling, that you might get a few people to respond. So yes, I want people to write letters, but I want them to write letters that are going to be effective. And I think the letters that are going to be effective are the ones that are rational and measured. And again, there's going to be a lot of people still that just throw away anyway. But there are, I just believe, and maybe I'm naive, but I believe there's at least a handful of people that actually are going to read those letters and think about them, and they're maybe going to be moved by them. And so, yeah, I encourage letter writing.
Well, it's the numbers, isn't it? If I write one letter, whether it's rational or maybe not so rational, it's going to get thrown in the trash. But if a given legislator or the White House gets 100,000 letters, it doesn't matter what they say. It's a statement that people are up in arms. And so the question is how the 100,000 get together. And that's a question, David, of leadership, because these efforts, some of the ones I mentioned, absolutely require leadership. Like Bernie Sanders and AOC, they got to be there. They're leaders and they draw like a magnet and everybody comes around. And so what we need, and this has been a problem with the Democratic Party, what we need is somebody 10 feet tall who is urging us to do this step or that step or a combination of steps. Don't you agree? And is there anybody out there who you think could be a leader and organize the resistance?
I would say, to be quite honest, in the quote unquote leadership that we have now, no. In terms of across the Democratic Party, I mean, there's some people here and there that have their niches, but no, there's no one that I've seen that would have the breadth to be able to pull that off. You see, what do we see? We see, well, let me temper that. At least at the governor level, there are some sparks of leadership there, and I'm going to speak to Governor Walz and what he's been doing. I speak to Pritzker, what he's been doing. But on the whole, if we start with the federal level, I mean, we just saw how dysfunctional the House-Senate relationship is, where the House, 100% of the Democrats voted against the bill, and then over the Senate time, when it comes to be cloture, we have we're going to vote against it, and then 3 days later, Schumer and 9 others capitulate, so there's cloture, and they can go and make the vote on the continuing resolution. And the rationalizations people make, sort of like, I'm never going to vote to have the government shut down, or that's if you're playing into the hands of what these folks like the OMB guy and all want to do if we do that, because you give him free reign. I mean, to me, I say, what do those employees at the federal government want? And they wanted them to vote against it. Well, I think they know better than these so-called leaders. And quite honestly, I think there's other stuff going on, not the rationalizations you hear, but other stuff. There was kinds of pressures that were put on them to lead them to go that way and change within 48 hours. So you get these leaders who are susceptible to whatever kind of pressures that Trump is able to put on them. That's the kind of people we have now that are there. And maybe that's the best that we can expect in America, quite honestly, because the kind of leader that would have the kind of qualities that we would imagine, is kind of a fantasy here, really, because we're so atomized and all that. But on the other hand, there are things like the indivisible movement, the kind of more organic, I would say, kinds of things that seem to coalesce into something. So it's not so much a leadership as is it a way of doing a process of channeling the dissent and people picking up in their local areas, or and then that what happens is you get these kind of affinity things that happen between individuals and organizations and money and all that. And that's the way I think it's more likely to work in America. My worry is that you're going to have somebody who's all of a sudden going to try to stand out in front of this and say, I am your leader. That is the problem we have on the other side, where we have somebody who is trying to say, I am your leader and I will make America great again, and creating a cult. I'm not sure we want those kind of leaders. I think on the whole, what we want is that things change. How do you get things to change? Well, at least on the political side, I'm a little more cynical than David, and I hope you'll permit me on this, but I just think whether they're conservative or they're liberal, there's only two things that they care about: getting reelected and having money. That's all they care about. And you can write a letter and all that, and that's fine. But if you write a letter and say, I'm not going to vote for you, or you have events and say, I'm not going to vote for you, especially on the House side where they got elections coming up, I think that has some impact. And when you send money, as David said, and I agree with 100%, to the other side saying, we're going to help you beat that other one. And I'm more of the kind of in your face thing, a little more than David, because maybe it's because of my bias from having lived in France and seeing general strikes and all that kind of stuff, where, people just show like, hey, no, I'm not happy. I'm not happy. I mean, for example, let's just take one here. I don't know if you saw this, but I think everybody, you had the Secretary of Commerce talk about his 94-year-old mother losing her Social Security, not getting her Social Security check, and that she wouldn't worry about it. She said, probably just an error. It'll come out, next month she'll get it, right? And you look at that and you say, her son is a billionaire. Her son is a billionaire. Of course she's not going to worry about it, because the son can give her $100,000 to get her through the month, But when you start to hear about people, and there are a lot of people, I think 40% of the people on Social Security, or at least 20 to 40%, I can't remember what the number is, who literally live on that check. And then you start to hear about, I think, over 85s, most of the people who are getting that over 85 are women. And you hear about people having to go to offices as opposed to being able to do things online. It's like, no, I'm going to be pissed off about that. I'm going to be angry about thinking that that's a bright idea. The incompetence with which Doge is doing what it's doing, which is, let me put it to you this way. It sure looks to me like what they're doing is destroy Social Security so we can grab that pension trust fund money. Destroy the post office so we can grab that pension trust fund money. That we've seen in the 80s, 90s, and 10s happen all over corporate America. And it seems like they're doing the exact same thing. And yeah, you can be a little upset about all that. You're allowed to be upset,
Well, I think you're allowed to be upset. Going on with the post office, it's not just the pension fund. It's 43% in 2020 of Americans cast their ballot through the mail.
Thank you.
43%. So if you privatize, if you make the post office ineffective, and the fact is more Democrats use that service than Republicans, I mean, that's a way to disenfranchise. So
sure.
When we talk about privatizing the post office, I worry about that. When I talk about writing letters in a measured tone, that doesn't mean that at the end of the letter, you don't say that you're losing your constituents and it's unlikely you're going to get elected. You want that in the letter. It's not just care about your constituents, understanding that they care about themselves probably primarily. So you end the letter saying, and here's why it's going to cost you.
Yeah.
So I think if you write that letter, not going to affect 90% of them.
David lives in Minnesota. I was raised in New Jersey. You're hearing New Jersey coming out of me with a little bit of the French in the way to approach it. And you're hearing Minnesota in the way that Dave is doing, right? You don't have to do it one way, right? There's a whole range of ways to express what you want to say. And I think that's part of what people can see here. They're not saying Dave and I are disagreeing. is that we're coming from different cultural spaces, that you do things a certain way and you don't do things a certain way. I mean, I think that's, but you do something. Notice the key thing for both of us is you do something.
I think you have to be careful what you do because we're in a war. We're in a war for the media, and that's obvious in the newspapers, all the media every day. Today, articles about NPR and PBS and so forth, and the administration is trying to kill the liberal media. And then, of course, the war goes into other directions against the lawyers, against the law firms who might represent people. And so you have to be careful. On the other hand, how careful do you have to be? If you go and do malicious mischief on a Tesla and burn it, destroy it, break into a showroom, what have you, you're not going to be facing the local, prosecuting attorney. You're going to be facing the Department of Justice, which I don't really feel that's domestic terrorism or a federal matter at all. It's malicious mischief, maybe, but you got to be careful because it's a war, and the Department of Justice has been instructed to go after you, and that means a criminal prosecution, and God forbid. And then there's this woman. I think she was a student at Columbia because she was involved in these protests. They should revoke her immigrant status, her permanent resident status. Incredible. Never heard of that before. Revoke it because of something she said at a protest. And they're chasing her. They're trying to detain her. God knows where they're going to send her. El Salvador. There's all these threats. So what I'm getting at is that she is a victim. Let's just take her for a moment. She's a victim. And in a sense, she's a leader, because if she speaks up, if she writes like Rachel Cohen, the same sort of thing, she gets elevated to the public consciousness. And now everybody sees her name and Rachel's name. And of course, the administration is going to try to attack these people and criticize them and, try to demean them in every way they can or arrest them. But they become heroes. They become leaders in their victimhood. And the question then is, what do they or the lawyers, hopefully they can find lawyers, the lawyers who represent them, what can they do? I think victimhood is connected with the media. The media has to make you a victim, and it has to propagate your victimhood. And then you become a leader of many, many people, who are concerned about you. And so, David, I'd like you to comment on that, because I think that does draw people together, even without a conscious selection of a leader. It's just the way it works. These people are victimized. And by the way, this could happen to anybody, including a full-blown citizen who speaks against him and who has something to lose. And so he attacks this person. So we have to be able to give some advice as to what that individual or organization does to defend themselves, and also to be call it a victim leader.
Well, right now, I'm all about motivating voters, and we know that storytelling motivates voters, and storytelling can be true stories. Doesn't mean you have to be fiction stories; they're true stories. So, telling these stories and making sure that these stories are circulated, I think, can be very effective in terms of motivating people and drawing analogies that. Do you know somebody who's similarly vulnerable? Maybe not in the exact same way. I always like the idea: can you bring it home? Can you bring it closer to the person? It's somebody out in New York or Columbia. That's where we start. But we can connect dots, and we can bring these events a lot closer to home. And I think that's what we need to do, and we need to do it ourselves to tell the stories. And hopefully encourage people that we know who, if not in the established media, or at least on social media, to circulate these stories.
Your thoughts on this, Ben?
So let me start with the foreigners, okay? With regard to somebody who's a foreigner here on any kind of visa, including permanent residence, my basic advice to them is, you don't get involved, because they will do what they do. they revoke your visa and they deport you. I mean, just understand that that's a huge risk you run because you're not a citizen. And you may feel passionately about things, but it's really you are really basically dependent on the state unless there's some kind of rights that the states are going to recognize for you on your visa status. And trust me, there's a lot of power about immigration in the federal government of any state. Okay, and I say this because I lived in France 17 years as an immigrant, as a legal immigrant, and it was clear that you're not going to be going out and demonstrating against the education department and stuff like that as a foreigner. But what you would move me was to watch the French out there in the streets defending foreigners who didn't have the position. And so to me, it's like we're supposed to do as citizens of the United States. We have a duty. We have a duty to all those foreigners, whether documented or undocumented, to defend them. Now, there's language that we're not used to having here in America that we need to have. I love that the letter that Mahmoud Khalil got out of detention down in Louisiana starts out, "Hi, I am Mahmoud Khalil. I am a political prisoner." I was like, whoa, the idea that, the term we tend to use in other countries in the world, right? We have a political prisoner. We have people who have been disappeared by our government to El Salvador. Disappeared is a term that people associate with Pinochet in Chile or Argentina under the generals. No, this is right here at home. And we have a duty, I think, as Americans to those people to make sure they get the basics, which are what? How about some due process, folks? By the way, another thing that we need to do is, if you notice, it's very hard to fight the federal government as citizens because there's a number of doctrines that the Supreme Court has put in place over the years that try to basically shut you down. One's the classic one we just saw, state secrets. Ooh, ooh, ooh. So we can't, the judge is not supposed to be able to see that. Do you know where that came from? It came from a widow being upset about her husband being killed in the military on a plane. And she trying to find out what happened. And there was actually some kind of mess up that happened. Some stupid thing was done, but they didn't want to own up to it. So they created this doctrine called state secrets to hide the incompetence. You see what I'm saying? There's a bunch of these things that are around that make it very frustrating in the litigation space, so to speak. So to me, it's like, as citizens, you find a thing to do, you support the undocumented, you support the foreigners with visas, because you're the only voice that they have that has at least a chance of not being kicked out of the country. That's for today, okay? I mean, they had Judge Millett talking about she could be taken out of the country under the definition of alien enemies that the federal government was arguing. But and I think that I like to think that personally there's a notion of ordinary citizens, that ordinary citizens at key moments in time have done what they could. Let me give you one other example. When there was the internment of the Japanese Americans and Japanese origin folks during World War II, one of the things that people don't talk about is that their neighbors went down to the mayor, went down to whoever it was and said, this is not right. Bill and Mary are good people. You don't hear any of that part of the story. Or there were among the Japanese Americans, there was kind of the let's be in the military and be the wonderful, amazing, winning all kinds of medals people. But there was another group too that said, yeah, we will go and fight against the Nazis in World War II if you get our families out of the internment camps. They never talk about those people. And it's that part that we kind of always get lost in the history. So to me, it's like ordinary citizens can do some very powerful things that
Well, there's a duty on them. It's like
yeah.
there's a duty on lawyers to protect the rule of law in general and the Constitution. And there's a duty on citizens too. I certainly agree. In fact, the title of our discussion is What Can Citizens Do? Because citizens have a different situation. On the other hand, David, citizens can get in trouble too. If they want to burn Teslas, that's not a good thing. If they get involved in a protest that turns violent or that has provocateurs who are sent in to turn it violent, maybe they shouldn't want to be there. And citizens are also exposed, to the administration's efforts at quashing their free speech. So I guess we're at the point now where we're really running out of time. And David, I wonder if you can give us your thoughts about all of this and a message that you would leave to our viewing audience. How should they see this? How careful should they be as citizens and as non-citizens?
I agree with Ben that humanity has rallied to causes in history, and that we would like people to be inspired to do that, and we hope they do. I also like bringing it home. Ben identified this idea of due process, and sending people to El Salvador. Well, due process is something people, I think, can understand, that if their freedom is being taken away, well, maybe you're not going to be shipped to El Salvador, but there's lots of things that can be taken away from you. And, if there's no process, there's no procedure, they can just be taken away from you. Aren't you a little concerned about that? Don't you think that this idea of due process is important and something you should stand up for? So even though you don't personally identify with somebody that's pulled off to El Salvador, maybe you can identify with this need for due process and the idea of fairness, because that does come home and that can affect you. And hopefully that can motivate you. So, I guess I come back to the idea that Ben has advocated, do something. I really think it's critical to do something. You just can't disengage. That's the scariest thing right now. People who just step back and with their jaws dropped and say, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what to do. Again, it can be as small as giving a $5 donation to a candidate, maybe just writing one letter, maybe go to a town hall meeting. It's interesting what's happening with those town hall meetings. People are, you talk about it, is there momentum? Well, there's momentum there because they're getting so outspoken that Republicans are just canceling them. There's one Republican who was scheduled to go to town hall meeting, didn't show up, instead sent donuts, saying, I hope you enjoy my donuts. Yeah, he did. It's, they're getting chased out of their own town hall meetings. So yeah, chase them out of their town hall meetings. But above everything, pick something that you can do and then do it.
Yeah, Ben, I'm reminded of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. What did he say about fear?
The only thing to fear is fear itself.
Yeah, and a lot of people who sit on the sidelines who say they don't want to be involved are driven by fear. They don't want anybody taking steps against them, taking their life, liberty, property, sacred honor, what have you. So they don't do anything and wait for it to pass. And that was a problem in Germany. And Hitler would never have gotten as far as he did had he not been able to scare people that way, scare them about being told upon, being turned in, even within a family. So fear is important. But on the flip side of fear is courage. And I think it's a time for courage. It's a time for courage by citizens, of course, by lawyers, of course, and of course, maybe not citizens as well, everybody. But I wonder if you give us your final comments about that or anything else you'd like to leave with our audience.
All of us in American citizens, we know this little phrase, right? Home of the free, land of the brave, right? We all learned that one, right? So if you're sitting there fearful and watching your freedom lose and you're being not being courageous, then what were you singing all that time? When you talked about America as the home of the free and the land of the brave. I mean, be free, be brave. That's what it meant. And that's what, at our core is something about who we are. And we fought a revolution so that we would not have a king. And there's always been an effort in America to have sort of the president be a king. And we have to reject that. That's why we fought the revolution. That's why we had the Constitution put in place, because we rejected that concept. So please act free and be brave. That's all.
All right. Thank you so much to our co-host, Ben Davis, who in his own right is an esteemed guest and a law professor as well. Esteemed guest also, David Larson, professor at Mitchell Hamlin School of Law. I'm Jay Fidell, host of American Issues Take One. We've been discussing what citizens, and maybe not so citizens, can do to control the Trump regime. Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha.